Do you want to do immense good deeds this Ramadan? Do you want to get one step closer to Jannah? Then you have come to the right place. This offer is a limited time offer. Boys in the Cave have started a Launch Good campaign and they need your support to take their podcast to the next level. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the best charity is that given in Ramadan. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam also said, when a person dies, his deeds come to an end, except for three: Sadaqah Jariyah, a continuous charity, or knowledge from which benefit is gained. So imagine every donation you make to Boys in the Cave this Ramadan, when someone listens to our podcast and benefits from our content, you get rewarded every time someone listens to our podcast till the Day of Judgment. You definitely don't want to miss out on such an opportunity this Ramadan. You can be the reason why Boys in the Cave go to the next level. So head over to launchgood.com/boysinthecave, and inshallah I'll put up the links to our Launch Good campaign as show notes as well, inshallah. We're aiming for 100 people to donate $100 each to meet our target. So let's make this happen, inshallah. And to wrap it up, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, charity never decreases wealth. Rather, it increases, it increases, it increases. May Allah reward you immensely for your generosity. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to another episode of Boys in the Cave. My name is Tanzim. I'm joined by my co-host Rafael. And before we jump into our episode, I just wanted to let everyone know about, our Patreon page. We've got a lot of ties you can donate, or if you want to help us out and you get like little perks and benefits as well, you can go for $20, $25. So definitely check that out. Patreon.com/boysinthecave. But I don't want to keep our guests waiting for too long, so I'll jump straight into it. We have a dear brother here, brother Mustafa Omar. So he's a student at the University of Sydney, where he studies a Bachelor of Science, majoring philosophy and psychology. And he's also a student of knowledge who operates extensively on the Dawah scene across MSAs, running Dawah seminars and workshops, and lecturing occasionally at Sydney Medina, which is an Islamic community centre. So, assalamu alaikum, Mustafa, and welcome to Boys in the Cave.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you guys for keeping me here and hosting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, you've actually been, in the community for some time now, and you've also obviously, given Dawah. Before, coming here and recording, we were talking about your experiences, with Christians, for example, and stuff. So what's your journey been like through, doing Dawah essentially?
Well, I'll start off in terms of I've been giving Dawah for a while now. So it's been almost 7 years since I've been giving Dawah, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. And so I started off with my brothers. So I used to go out with my brothers for Dawah. And that was like a good facilitating environment for me to go out with my brothers giving Dawah. And that's how I actually started my Dawah, my career, if you like, my Dawah journey. And from that, I began to start learning how to give Dawah. I started watching YouTube clips, YouTube videos from, for example, Hamza Zorsez, Subur Ahmad, Imran Hussein, Imran Ibn Mansour, for example. And I used to watch the Dawah clips, the Dawah YouTube videos. And from that, alhamdulillah, I gained knowledge. Then I used to use that knowledge when I used to give Dawah. And ever since now, alhamdulillah, I'm always trying to seek knowledge when it comes to giving Dawah and how to give Dawah. What's the best approach and strategy to employ when giving Dawah.
It's really interesting. I'll tell a quick story for our listeners about Mustafa. And one day I was out at a Dawah stand at university, and one of the brothers pointed out to me that the Christians, because we have a very large Christian organization on campus called the Evangelical Union. Not only are they a very large Christian organization, but as the name suggests, they're very evangelical. They like to get out there and they like to do their Christian Dawah pretty much everywhere they can possibly go. They will go and they will talk to you about the Bible and Christianity. And it's really funny, whenever we have our Dawah stands, there's always 2 or 3 Christians that go straight to Mustafa because they know that he's very well versed in this, and that he's got incredible arsenal of points and understanding and a lot of experience as well. So they actually go to him and they kind of hog him with kind of these, how would you describe the questions? Like very...
The question is really like in terms of, so they would have like prepared questions. Okay, so what do you think about, for example, the Gospel of John? So what are your thoughts on the Gospel of John? What do you think about Paul? Like, do you think that Paul changed Christianity? So they'll ask all of these questions, trying to provoke and trying to consume my time, spending on these individuals speaking about Dawah. And that's like, the questions are very repetitive. So they'll come up with similar questions, same questions. Sometimes they'll ask me a question about my own religion. Okay, so you know about Uthman radiallahu anhu, how he burnt the Qur'ans, the different versions of the Qur'an. So what do you think about that? Or how was the Qur'an preserved? They ask, again, the same questions, repetitive. And it gets a bit annoying as well, seeing the same faces, same arguments, same, speech. But yeah,
it's not particularly genuine, you'd say, is it? When that approach is taken?
Yeah, you can tell. like if it's repetitive, same argument, same people coming to you, that it's a lack of sincerity, a lack of the person being genuine, seeking out the truth. So yeah, you could tell, and usually what happens is that when I speak to these people, I'll say, well, look, I've told you my beliefs and I understand your beliefs, so if we can have our ways going different paths, and that's all right.
I wanted to ask you specifically about, because you mentioned Gospel of John, or what you thought of they ask you kind of probing questions, right? So for example, when a Christian kind of comes up to you, what's he trying to get out of you by asking you questions about what do you think of the Gospel of John? Like what are they trying to achieve, like when they get to you?
So our main argument, our main contention against the Gospel of John in specific is that it differs incredibly from the other Gospels. So you have the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Luke, and they're like called the Synoptic Gospels according to the Christian tradition. The Synoptic Gospels because they're very similar in the expression, they're similar in the narratives, they're similar in the stories. When it comes to the Gospel of John, you have a complete different narrative or complete different representation of Jesus Christ. So they ask us, as in, what's our opinion with the Gospel of John? Do you think it's one of the but do you think it's one of the authoritative canonical Gospels which are accepted by the church fathers or not? So that's really the main issue that they're trying to get at, and like even amongst the Christian scholars themselves, they realize that in the Gospel of John there's a high Christology, which means a high status of Jesus Christ, that he's the Lord and the Savior of mankind, that he really came to die for his sins, he's the sacrificial Son of God, and they come up with all of these different ideas that are not present in the other Gospels.
About Gospel of John, I used to be super into like Christian, debates and all that kind of stuff. I used to like binge watch Ahmadiyyat. From my memory, Gospel of John was like one of the earlier ones. So was it?
No, it's actually the last one.
Is it the last?
That's the last one. The earliest gospel from the four gospels was the Gospel of Matthew, then the Gospel of Mark.
But Gospel of John was the latest of all the books. Okay, that's what I meant. So in terms of that, what from the Muslim perspective is that since it's one of the latest books out of all of them, that means that it's more likely to be corrupted.
Exactly.
So they know this. Like, so the Christians, when they come up to you and ask these questions, they actually know this specific fact, I guess.
Well, they wouldn't believe that it is corrupt. They'll believe that it's been divinely inspired, and that the so-called author of the Gospel of John, which is not really John, but it's actually anonymous. We don't know who are the real authors of the Gospels, of the four Gospels. But the so-called Gospel of John, they claim that he's divinely inspired by God and that he wrote down the narratives of Jesus Christ, for example. But they don't believe it's been corrupt, as in it's part of the belief that it is the word of God. They have been divinely inspired and it is preserved.
I was going to ask, so do Christians have a chain of narration like Muslims do in relation to the Gospels and the recording of the Gospels?
They claim they do. They actually claim they do, but it's broken. So there's like what you call inqita', as in it's a broken, a disconnection of isnad.
So they're
it's
all,
our version
they're all
of like weak hadith.
Pretty much. Yeah. For us, we would consider it da'if. We wouldn't accept it at all. But for them, like for example, you have the Gospel of Mark. Okay, but who did he get that information from? It's unknown, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah,
They
it's
don't
actually
know.
unknown. Yeah. But there's actually debates even amongst Christian scholars themselves. So I'm not trying to be biased here, but some claim that there was a source for the Gospel of Mark. Some say there was a source for the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of John, etc. Yeah, so there's actually difference of opinion, as I was saying, even amongst the Christian scholars themselves. So they'll say that it's a hypothetical M material, hypothetical L materials, for Luke, as in where did Luke get the information? So it's all hypotheticals. So we actually don't know the sources or the places and the informations where these gospels got the information from. And also, just to add, they claim that the authors of the 4 gospels were eyewitnesses, that they were eyewitness testimonies. In fact, if you look at some Christian scholars such as Bar Ehrman, as well as another Christian scholar, Bruce Metzger, and other Christian scholars as well, they have testified and have confirmed that they were not eyewitnesses. They actually came later on, and they claim that they got the information from the eyewitnesses. But as in, the point to be made is that they are not eyewitness testimonies who lived with Jesus Christ and recorded at the time of Jesus Christ. It happened after, as they claim, he was crucified and resurrected. Many years after. Yeah.
I want to bring up 2 points with you. So, Bart Ehrman is obviously very famous because he, was Christian, and then he worked out all this stuff, and then is pretty much agnostic atheist at the moment.
Yeah, apostated.
But he's interesting because Christians will look at him and be like, he wasn't genuine. We don't take from his information, the information that he kind of talks about, he's not, genuine, or that kind of, argumentation. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that the reason why they're saying that is because he differs with mainstream, Trinitarian Christianity. The point is that Bar Ehrman, he is an expert scholar, PhD, expert, qualified, trained scholar who studied under Bruce Metzger. And Bruce Metzger is one of the leading authorities in Christian, particularly when it comes to the evangelical Christians. He's one of the leading scholars. Bruce Metzger passed away recently, and his student was Bar Ehrman. So he's qualified. He's an expert in that regard.
So to clarify, this Bruce Metzger was a Christian. He
was a Christian. He died as a Christian. Although his student, Bar Ehrman, didn't die as a Christian. He apostated. He's an agnostic, as they call him now.
Oh, so that's interesting. So his teacher, his kind of understanding is rooted in Metzger's understanding of Christianity,
exactly.
which is that the Gospels were not eyewitness accounts, basically. And then from that, Bart Ehrman kind of came to the conclusion that there could be a lot more.
It's actually very complicated. People simplify it. And I don't like when Christians try to simplify the whole historical aspect of the Gospels, but it's not like black and white. There's so much information, so much dispute amongst Christian scholars even today, trying to think and trying to construct how were these Gospels written.
Because why I bring up Bart Ehrman in particular, because Nabil Qureshi, who actually passed away I think months back, and you're probably familiar with him. He mentioned in one of his talks I was watching, he was like, the reason why Bart Ehrman, lost the faith because so I guess Christians have a way of approaching their religion, or right now they have this specific approach because they realize Bible is like in terms of corruption, all that kind of stuff. So the route that Nabil Qureshi was pointing to was to say that Bart Ehrman, what he didn't have at the beginning was faith in Jesus, and then after that, like the text is like a secondary kind of matter, if that makes sense. Do you see that sort of approach being taken by current Christians in this day and age?
Yeah, in these circles, because they would say that faith in Christ comes first, and
it's like a feeling.
They do, especially when you look at the Dawah or the proselytization or the evangelization of these Christians. They focus more on Jesus, the character of Jesus, that he is your Lord, he's your Savior, accept him, have faith in him, as opposed to reading the Bible. Or they would have like Bible circles, but very selective passages from the Bible pointing to having faith in Jesus, having faith that he's your Lord, he's your Savior, he came to die for your sins, etc. So yeah, I would agree with you that there's actually a change in terms of reading the Bible objectively and reading what the scholars have said with regards to the Bible, and just having, faith in Jesus first.
And one other thing I wanted to bring up with you is because you mentioned that, I think with the text, with the Bible text and stuff like that, there weren't people, no one knew who, wrote the Bible.
Anonymous, yeah.
But what about testimony? Because a lot of Christians bring up this really important point is about witnessing the resurrection of Jesus. That, 400, 500 people saw, Christ be resurrected, so that's why the whole theology kind of comes into play. So there's a lot of that incident and the fact that there was testimony and the evidence there to back their belief system, if that makes sense. So is there actually like testimony or kind of evidence that people witnessed Christ resurrecting? That
not that I have come across, and although like I should make it like a disclaimer that I'm not an expert in this field in Christianity, but a lot of Christians do claim that there are external historical sources, documents which report that Jesus Christ was resurrected.
All the time, like all my encounters, but I don't know what it is.
Pretty much in every of my dialogues that I have with them, in any debate that you come across,
bro, it's history, don't you know?
Listen, guys, let me just put something forward to you guys. I studied a lot of Roman history at school. I love Roman history. Obviously, myself, I'm Roman, so I would love Roman history.
The background.
And let me tell you, the Romans wrote everything down. They literally wrote everything. They'd be like, Flavius walked his dog on Wednesday. It was a rainy day.
That pedantic.
Yeah, they wrote everything.
Wow.
Julius Caesar wrote a account of his conquests. Like I went here and then it rained. And then this person who supposedly claims to be king of the Jews was crucified, and there's no contemporary Roman account. The first account they have is Josephus.
Yeah, Josephus.
And that was more than half a century later. Minimum.
Around that, yeah.
Yeah, about 70 AD.
70 AD, yeah.
Yeah, or around half a century after the birth of Christ. So they don't really have any contemporary... actually, interestingly, and I'll bring this point up, I was doing a lot of research into the historicity of Islam, and I'm pretty sure the Prophet ﷺ is the only major religious figure who has a contemporary external religious source about him.
Wow.
It wasn't flattering, but the Greeks mentioned that there was... the Prophet ﷺ came out of Arabia with his companion who they call Abu Bakaros, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, and how the Greek writer, this was in 632, so the year of the death of the Prophet ﷺ. And he said that he claims to be a prophet, but prophets do not come with chariots. So he was still making a relation to the fact that that he was a military leader as well. But that's actually, even though it wasn't flattering, it's still a contemporary source about the Prophet ﷺ. And it's like Jesus does not have this. Isa alayhi salam and the Christian construction of Jesus doesn't actually have any contemporary sources, and nor actually does any other religious figure.
No, and it's actually meant to be the most important event for all of Christianity.
You're basing your theology.
Yeah, pretty much all of your theology rests upon the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Yet there's not a contemporary external source corroborating the resurrection of Jesus. So
and the other thing is that let's just say they did witness him being resurrected. I don't think that conflicts with our train of thought or our theology, because they make the leap that he died for the sins of humanity. Like, if that makes sense. Like, for us, obviously, we don't want a prophet to die at that state, but it could be that someone, like, there's theories of what might have happened or whatnot. So it's not really a big issue for Muslims per se. But for them, I guess, they're making a big leap saying that, Christ died for the sins of humanity by being resurrected. That's like another leap or another conclusion they're making for that, if that makes sense. Yeah,
the main central beliefs of Christianity actually hinges upon these two: the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, that he came to die for our sins, that he's our savior apparently, and that he was resurrected by God. So God resurrected him, so these are the two main pillars of Christian faith. But when it comes to the other point of difference in terms of the resurrection, we can say logically it's possible in terms of prophets that they can die, then God can resurrect the prophets. So logically it's possible from a textual point of view, as in what the Quran says, بَرْ رَفَعَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَيْهِ, that God raised him to the heavens, so we know that he wasn't crucified, and from that we know he couldn't have been resurrected because he wasn't crucified.
Yeah, it's a Quranic understanding. Just leading on to a more general kind of understanding of the contentions made, what are the sort of points that Christians bring to you about Islam? And also non-Muslims, like all general non-Muslims, because
so not about Christian, just in general?
Christianity as well.
Okay,
But
yeah,
like,
yeah.
what are the sort of things you hear about why Islam is not the true religion from people when you're giving dawah in
To be honest, when I give da'wah, there's a lot of ignorance. Not many people know about Islam. That's the honest truth. Like whenever like I'm going out and giving da'wah, and whenever the boys are going out and giving da'wah, and we're asking the question, how much do you know about Islam? What do you know about Islam? Have you heard of Islam before? Yeah, I've heard of Islam before, but I don't know much about Islam. I don't know what you guys believe in. I know you guys fast because that's like a public thing. We all fast in the month of Ramadan. But when it comes to our beliefs and our teachings and what we Muslims do, they lack that understanding. So there's a lot of ignorance when it comes to the public domain in their understanding of Islam. But for those that do know a bit of Islam, one of some of the main contentions that you do hear and that you do get, if it's from a Christian, it would usually be the Quran supposedly confirms the previous scriptures. So the Quran says that it's a musaddiq, that it confirms the previous scriptures. Therefore, you would have to rely on the previous scriptures, which makes the Quran redundant. So it's this false argument that they're making. Another contention that you would get is with regard to the marriage of Aisha radiallahu anha with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that she was such a young age.
That's a classic one.
That's a classic one. Yeah. Everyone gets that. Everyone gets that type of argument. So that's a common, frequently asked question that you get, mainly by Christians, not much by atheists. Atheists are the more materialistic. They're like really engrossed in this world, so they don't think about religion. They don't have any concern about religion at all.
Yeah, I think that's true. I don't think they're particularly open to kind of finding truth, because they don't believe that truth exists in anything like a religion or a faith or anything like that. Even though atheism, would you say atheism is a faith? I would.
I would say it has turned into a faith, but it depends on what you mean by atheism, because there are some atheists that like, I don't care about anything. You know what I mean? Like they don't really have a faith.
That in itself is a faith.
Yeah. Well, the thing I say to my dad, it's like, because my dad is probably an atheist, but the thing I say to him is, I'm like, how would you say, like a hypothesis in the absence of truth, knowledge of truth, is a faith in a way.
Okay, yeah. So agnosticism at that level, where you have this belief or a faith that you cannot ascertain knowledge with regards to the God, the Creator, then yeah, of course, that's a type of belief, that's a type of faith. Yeah.
Like, but the atheists, what they'll say, I was actually having a chat with Rafael about this before this episode, was that what they will say in return is that, like, you could say the same, maybe there's a pink giraffe that lives on Mars and you want me to have faith on that to communicate with me. Like, it's such a stupid like argument, but you got to deal with it in a certain way, right? So what would you reply? What would your reply be?
Well, the reply would be there is no evidence for that, as opposed to the evidence of God.
Boom.
Yeah. Like really, like as in, and the evidence of God can be it's in multiple ways it can be expressed. But like it hinges upon logical, rational arguments as one way, as opposed to pink unicorn or something in Mars or whatever. There's no evidence for that at all whatsoever. It's possible, but there's no evidence for that.
Like because the way I'd usually argue that would be, once you've conceptualized a version of God, like making it be like something that you see, like a giraffe or a horse, it's not God, if that makes sense. It can be a God, but it's not the God that we are referring to, and not what the monotheistic religions are referring to.
That's actually a common contention that you get, and that is, why do you say that the creator of the universe is your God, your conception of God, your understanding of God, as opposed to let's say something else, or some people have said like a spaghetti monster, some people said like a flying teaspoon. So there are many other different ways that people have said, okay, why does it have to be your particular God as a Muslim? Why not some other type of God? So how do we prove our case, our Islamic belief in God, that it has to be this type of understanding of God, as opposed to a flying saucer or something like that?
Would you often approach these kinds of pitches for Islam, like these sales positions for Islam, with a more kind of logical bent? Because we know about the Christian organizations, the evangelical Christians that we're talking about before, how they're largely based on trying to create this kind of emotional, evoke this kind of emotional response from the person, right? This kind of spiritual submission to Jesus that comes from mystic knowledge as opposed to a kind of logical basis. Would you say that there's, especially on university scenes, kind of a need for a more logical approach, or a more kind of mystical emotional approach, or a bit of both? Like, because we were talking before about the role of character in Dawah. So what kind of role does character play?
Yeah.
Do you think the strength of the logical arguments is...
So before going to the character and one's action, I think there needs to be a difference between one's conviction in God or belief in God and one's knowledge in God. So I think in order to ascertain and acquire knowledge of God, then it requires some type of logical, some type of rational method to acquire who God is, to acquire, what type of attributes must God possess in order to create the universe, for example, as opposed to having faith and conviction in God. So a lot of people have faith and conviction in God, and that doesn't require any knowledge. So you just have that faith and that conviction, that trust, that blind faith, really, that there is a creator of the universe without knowing who is that creator of the universe. So I think when it comes to knowing our Islamic concept of God, as stipulated by the Muslim theologians, then it does require some type of logical reasoning to arrive at that conclusion.
Wanted to ask in terms of, what kind of, for Muslims that are doing Dawah, what's the most, common mistake that you see when Muslims do give Dawah?
I really think that the most and the biggest mistake that Muslims make when giving Dawah is that they use a wrong strategy or they use an incorrect strategy when giving Dawah, as in their approach of Dawah. So, for example, if I were to ask you guys, why do Muslim women wear the hijab, what would be the common response?
Modesty.
Yeah, exactly. You're right.
Because I've heard it so much.
Yeah, I've heard that before, but like now I know that you should say because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala
Exactly.
recommended it. Yeah.
And we say that's the correct approach, because that gives a true representation of Islam, a true conception of Islam, that it's about submission to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as opposed to trying to reason or trying to rationalize why we do certain things, as in why do we pray 5 times a day. Someone might say because it's good exercise, meditation, etc.
Good structure for the day.
Yeah, therapy or whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's because it's the instruction, it's the mandate of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He commanded us to do this, and it's for our benefit whether we know it or not. But it's that aspect of submitting to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's the correct methodology that we should employ when it comes to giving da'wah.
And it's like bringing it back to Tawheed as well, because I guess, and even possibly talking about the Fitra as well, like all these concepts that are kind of glossed over when you're trying to rationalize just one aspect or like a fiqh ruling that obviously it means a lot, like fiqh, we have to follow it, but essentially it's not the be all or end all of everything, right? Yeah. It's about the theology, the crux of why do you believe in what you believe in, Iman, faith, what are these concepts? These are the most like essential, primary, essentially. And I guess you're trying to say that we tend to gloss over that aspect of Islam.
We do. We tend to focus more on the fiqh, on the the furu', the secondary subsidiary matters of Islam. And people, they really have debates. You have an atheist, for example, or a non-Muslim, totally different background of understanding, different perception, biases, experiences of life. And you have a Muslim speaking about a fiqh issue. Why do Muslim women wear the hijab? Well, they're coming from, two different conflicting perspectives. So the only way that you can make the other person understand is really to say, in Islam, our concept is submission to the will of God. And, this is what we do as Muslims. This is why we do certain things the way we do.
And would you say that for Muslims to do dawah, they need those fundamentals correct? Or would you recommend a Muslim to be fully learned in the deen before he can, or he and she, sorry, I don't want to be, a memonist, but, they have to be fully knowledgeable about the deen before, giving da'wah on the street. So what would you recommend?
Knowledge definitely is essential for da'wah. So you can't give da'wah without knowledge. So knowledge is like your prerequisite. It's like your entry point to da'wah. Knowledge is definitely necessary. But in saying that, you don't have to be an alim. In saying that, you don't have to be a sheikh or an expert, or, have some Islamic courses in order to give da'wah. And that's a common misconception that people have. And it's like one of those excuses that people give. I can't give da'wah. I shouldn't give da'wah. Why? Because I'm not an alim. I'm not a scholar. So I shouldn't be able to teach and convey the message of Islam.
convey from me, even if it is one verse.
Exactly, yeah. I was just about to say that the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Ballighu anni walau ayah," convey from me even if it's one verse. But the ulama say walau ayah, any piece of information of Islam. So it doesn't have to be a verse of the Quran. Any knowledge that you have of Islam, share that, convey that to the people. And obviously with rahmah, with compassion, as the Prophet ﷺ embodied.
Just to question you a bit, because the other reason that I've heard, even from close family, in regards to you don't have to necessarily do dawah, is that, you know, it's their religion, you know, that, you know, let them do what they want to do. It's, you know, they'll quote, you know,
Surat al-Kafirun.
Yeah. Lakum dinukum waliya din.
And then like, you know, let them be, and, you know, go about our own way, be practicing Muslim, but let them do what they do essentially. So what was your response to that?
My response to that is that what was the manhaj of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam?
So
the manhaj and the understanding and the methodology, the way, the path of Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam was to give da'wah to the people. It wasn't lakum dinukum walidin. It was once you've conveyed the message, and if they refuse to accept the message like continuously, then lakum dinukum walidin, I've done my job. You know, I've given you the warning, I've given you the understanding. Now it's up to you. But first comes da'wah, and that's first and foremost, and that's the manhaj of Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam.
What sort of knowledge do you think you need to have then to give da'wah? Like,
That's
what
a
is
good
the
question.
prerequisite knowledge?
That's a good question. So what type of knowledge do you need to have in order to give da'wah? I'll say aqidah. So first it's your aqidah, your Islamic beliefs, because essentially you want to call them to tawheed. You want to call them to the belief that Prophet Muhammad is the Prophet of Allah, that the Quran is the true final word and revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are all theological questions. So you need to have a theological background, not strong, but at least a good, reasonable understanding.
Foundational.
Basic understanding of theology. And once you have that, then you can inshallah give da'wah more effectively.
I wanted to add in as well. Do you find Christians or people of other faiths harder to have a, you know, fruitful discussion with, or to present, you know, Islamic ideas to, than just, you know, atheists and agnostics?
Definitely, I actually do think that whenever I speak to atheists or agnostics, what tends to be the case that they're more acceptable, they're more receptive, they understand, you know, your arguments, where you're coming from, but because they're more neutral, so they don't have a position. When it comes to Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, and any other type of religion,
Baha'is as well. There's Baha'is on campus.
There's heaps of Baha'is on campus, man. You'd be surprised.
Baha'is, they're low key, but they're
they're
staunch.
They're very well funded, and they're
what do you mean by
very
well funded?
They've got cash. The Baha'i organization. Let's just say
low key, you know.
They've got that.
They buy you like Dawah. the Dawah is like
no, they're well funded. They're very like. It's a very interesting. It's a very pleasing religion for like new age people and stuff. So they're very interesting.
Is it like Buddhism?
I don't know if you were on campus, but we had a couple of Baha'i people we brought into the Masalla who basically were like about to take Shahada.
Oh well,
because they accepted Islam, and then they like, as we were like, so you ready to take the Shahada? They'd be like, yeah, of course, but you know I'm Baha'i, right? And then it was really funny because one of the brothers came up and said they accepted Islam, but Islam did not accept them.
That's a good one. But what's interesting with the Baha'is, I've actually spoken to many of them on campus, and their belief are very ajib, strange. They say, yeah, I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Jew.
Really?
Yeah, they actually have this like belief where it's
They're perennialist, or?
Yes, kind of like perennialist.
Yeah. It's like I accept the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but at the same time I accept there was another Prophet after Prophet Muhammad.
That's what they believe. They kind of like, yeah.
So it's easy. Just be like, you know, there's contradictions. Like if you happen to be like Muslim and be like Buddhist, it's like
you actually can't.
No, they have different theologies, and I think second of all, they're calling the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam a liar. You know, they're calling him a liar, because he said, you know, that he was the last.
It mentioned the Quran.
It mentioned the
saying
Quran,
that God the liar.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Even worse, Allah, that the Quran is not the true word of God if you believe that there was a prophet.
And if you reject that, then you're not a Muslim to begin with.
Exactly. That's true.
So don't claim yourself to be a Muslim.
And they came a lot after obviously Islam, right? Like
1800s.
I know that was Baha'u'llah.
Baha'u'llah, yeah.
And he wrote like stuff. I don't know.
He wrote stuff.
That was his phase. It's like he wrote all these like random stuff, and a lot of people say
the argument was that.
But apparently, like he did magic and stuff, but people thought like he was getting.
He was I think he was from a Shia Muslim background in Iran, and he was actually trained in Shia Islam, like properly classically. And he got very into mysticism and like the kind of like Sufi kind of writings of like Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi and a lot of the other poets. And then from there, he kind of developed this understanding that he too was like the inheritor of them, but he was even more than that. He was actually a prophet of God as well, and he had access to this, and then he started to propagate.
But one question that I have is that did he claim that he was a prophet of God, or that people later on ascribed him to be a prophet of God?
That's actually a good question. Well, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. That could be possible too. I think that he did believe that, but it's also very possible.
Brother?
I don't know, but it's very possible that he didn't. believe that.
I think I talked to a Baha'i. It might have been a different faith group, but he said that they believe Baha'i Allah to be true because he had like a brother and he tried to establish his own religion, but the truth one kind of prevailed or something, some weird like logic. I got really confused, but they dialogue a lot with Christians, right?
They dialogue a lot with everyone on campus.
They do.
They're not a big, they're called the Ruhi society, which is interesting because that comes from like the Arabic word Ruh. And like a lot of their symbols are obviously Islamic symbols. They call God Allah, like Bahalullah, the flower of Allah.
Wow.
I think that's what it means, Baha. Yeah. I don't know, or something like that. And yeah, they really, and we had heaps of them having really long discussions with us, agreeing with everything we were saying.
One funny conversation I was having with a Baha'i, he said, look, this person is a prophet of God, Baha'u'llah, he's a prophet of God because he exhibited like magnificent character. His character was impeccable, perfect. And I'm like, okay, but Gandhi also had, impeccable character as well. Does that make him a prophet? Then he was silenced. Honestly, he couldn't say anything. He's like, okay.
Yeah, a lot of kind of logic falls flat.
It does.
Yeah, but I think that is of some point there in terms of the validity of akhlaq though. And it's like, it's really interesting because going back to the kind of Dawah discussion, and this is something I did ask you before, and it's something that is very relevant to me in my life because I told you guys about how I converted to Islam and how a lot of it didn't have to do with any logical understanding, and it didn't have to do with any even kind of at first like a kind of mystical understanding. It was more just the fact that I'd been told in my atheist circles that Islam was bad, all religion was bad, it would destroy humanity, and that it was the cause of wars, and that it was the cause of all these backward nasty things. And then I watched videos of Muslim speakers and they had such good character, and again another shout out to Kamal Saleh, but I saw him speak and I said, this man is not that. And obviously the religion that he's embodying is not that. And so what is the importance, in your opinion, of akhlaq and adab in dawah? Is it? I'd say it's the most important thing. If you don't have akhlaq and adab, you're not going to convey this religion properly.
If you look into the hadith corpus, the hadith collection in Islam, there's so much in a hadith speaking about the virtue of akhlaq, and that you have to exhibit, good manners, good character, has to be, your etiquette, your behavior with others, with people. Allah subhanahu even says in the Quran, وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا, so speak with the people with excellent words and speech. So, there's the whole understanding of having good character in Islam, especially when it comes to da'wah. Particularly when it comes to da'wah, because people, if people have wrong character or misbehaviors, if they show that, then the people will have a misperception of that. Like you initially, you were exposed, to incorrect information, or the people having bad behavior about Islam, show this this attitude that really wasn't good. It wasn't appealing to the people, and then that really turns people off of Islam. People like what kind of religion is this? I might as well stick to my religion. So having good characters is extremely important. In fact, many of the people embraced Islam because of the akhlaq of Rasulullah. Many of the people accepted Islam because just on the character and in the dealing, the way how the Prophet ﷺ, he dealt with the people, he spoke with the people. So it's a very effective tool, especially when it comes to giving da'wah. But even generally, we Muslims should embody good character at all times.
What's your shift gears a bit in terms of, because we talked about Christianity, Baha'ism, we'll talk about atheists a bit. What's your experience with them? Like, do you go down the philosophical kind of route and address existence of God, all that sort of stuff, or do you take a different approach? What's your approach with atheists, or have you ever?
Generally, generally it's the more philosophical, rational approach that I take with atheists. And the way how it starts is, for example, when I give da'wah, I'll tell them, okay, we as Muslims believe that there's good reasons, strong reasons, compelling evidences for the existence of God. Do you believe in God? So they'll say, no, I do not believe in God, or I'm not sure. And then I would ask them, okay, well, why? So they'll say, well, I just don't know. Like, I don't think there's evidence of God. I haven't come across any evidence for God. Then that would make me introduce my understanding of God. Usually it goes down that rational, logical way.
So
inevitably.
just to talk about that, how would you rationally go about proving God to an atheist? If you want, I can step into my past.
Yeah.
and
time travel.
Imagine being an atheist, and like, so if I said to you,
Yeah.
oh, hi, Mustafa, I'm Bob.
Nice to meet you, Bob.
Yeah, I don't believe in God. So yeah.
Well,
Imagine someone edits that out and just says "Boys in the Cave Heard commits kufr" on air. Like, imagine that. Yeah, that's it. No, so I'm not. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe there is, but I just don't. I don't see any evidence for it. So how would you begin to approach Bob?
So I'll say, will Muslims believe that God does exist? And I personally think there is strong evidence for the existence of God. One such evidence is the cosmological argument. Now, this is not the only argument, but I'm just using the cosmological argument.
So what is the cosmological argument?
So the cosmological argument, I'll just mention the actual content, the material, as opposed to the history. But I'll just mention it anyways. It was by Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah. He was basically the first person that developed and formulated the Kalam cosmological argument. And
did he actually, he was the one who actually came up with it?
Yeah, he was actually the first person that formulated the structure in terms of its deductive structure. In that way, it was by Ghazali, rahimahullah.
Like, I assume Christians use the same argument.
They do.
Thomas Aquinas, he stole it, he borrowed it. You can use whatever word you want. He was a Christian today. Even William Lane Craig, he harps on that argument.
Do you still think it's the strongest argument, or do you think there's stronger actual rational, logical ways to prove?
I personally think that is a strong argument. I personally think the Kalam cosmological, and by the way, there's different cosmological arguments. So this is one cosmological argument from a family of cosmological arguments. Like, for example, another cosmological argument is the argument from contingency. That's also called the cosmological argument. But the argument that I will be speaking about in Arabic is actually called Dalil al-Huduth. So Dalil al-Huduth, which means evidence, proof from creation, from origination. So the Kalam cosmological argument, the first premise of the argument would be whatever starts, whatever begins to exist has a cause for its beginning. The second premise would be that the universe had a beginning, or the universe started. So the conclusion would be, therefore, the universe has a cause for its beginning. So for the first premise, obviously you would have to substantiate, you would give some evidence for the first premise, that whatever begins to exist needs a cause. Now, to me, I think this is a very logical principle. It's something which is, it cannot be negotiated with. It's very intuitive. Like, whatever starts, whatever emerges, whatever begins requires a cause for its existence, requires something for its beginning. Something starts, it must have needed something for its beginning. So usually there's not much debate, although now, in contemporary philosophy, as well as in, quantum physics, they usually use certain arguments against the first premise in order to undercut the whole argument.
I don't think any of those are particularly strong, though. Like, none of them convinced me. I was actually having a discussion with someone who claimed to be an ex-Muslim, and it was after an atheist event, and I came up to him and he said, "Oh yeah, I don't believe in God." And he said that very proudly.
Is this the same one that we talked? Was it different?
Yeah, and he said, "I don't believe in God," and I said, "Okay," and I said, "So, what do you think was the ultimate cause of the universe?" And he started talking for a while, like, no. And genuinely, he went in a circle and he said, "No, let me take that back. It was something supernatural." And I was just like, okay, well, that's what I think too. And
Yeah.
he's like, but it wasn't God. And this is true. And then eventually he went on and on and on for a while about how he didn't mean supernatural and it was actually something else. And then my wife was actually sitting next to me and she just said, "I think he means the multiverse theory."
All right.
And so he was actually talking about the multiverse theory, and I actually had no idea what the multiverse theory was. Do you want to just quickly explain to me?
Yeah. So the multiverse theory, it's something used by many physicists as a way to substitute God. So exactly, what the person did, instead of saying it was God, they will say it was the multiverse theory, and that postulates that there is like an infinite pocket, an infinite sea of universes, or alternate universes, possible parallel universes. And they say infinite. There's actually an infinite sea of these universes outside of our universe.
Just to quickly touch on that, like from Islamic perspective, could that be possible? Because I remember coming across the opinion by Ibn Taymiyyah who said that Allah keeps creating. Like, he also just keeps creating to the end of time. But
Yeah, that's a different point. But in terms of possibility that there is a like a multiverse, yeah, that's possible.
But not in terms of our existence is contingent upon infinite number of universes.
That's a different issue.
That's impossible. And I would say that's actually logically impossible
That's
as well.
logically
Because,
impossible.
the next point in the Kalam cosmological argument, which we were touching upon, is infinite regress as well. You can't have an infinite regress.
Yeah, it's absurd. You can't have an infinite regression of temporal contingent causes and effects, because the result is really literally nothing.
Yeah, and I remember the example you gave in a lecture at Sydney Medina.
Yeah.
With the sniper.
Yeah. So I'll just say that. So imagine I'm a sniper, right? And I have a sniper and I want to shoot.
Is this multiverse or is it?
This is related to like the contingency upon, like, because the multiverse theory is that there were universes that preceded this universe.
But that's one theory of the multiverse. There's another theory of the multiverse that they were all just there. So
forever, yeah. So we say that things can't go forever, and this is why, I guess. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, yeah. So how we see the world is everything's got a beginning, sort of thing.
Yeah,
so
everything must
the
have
physicists are trying to get around that,
by saying that
there is a philosophical reasoning for why you can't get around that. And
this is the kind of argument that is.
Got my head around it, I hope. Yeah.
but just on the multiverse, there's also another type of hypothesis or explanation, and that is that the amount of universes are potentially infinite. So it actually had a starting point as opposed to an infinite regress of universes. So somehow you have universe 1, then universe 2, universe 3, and now maybe we have like 1 million universes, but it's potentially infinite.
But if there was an original universe, and then that doesn't refute anything.
It
that's
doesn't.
Completely possible in Islamic conceptions.
Yeah.
But exactly. The sniper example.
Yeah, I'll come back to the sniper example. So imagine I have a sniper and I shoot someone, and I need to ask, let's say, one of my soldiers, who's my friend, can I shoot the person? So then my friend who's a soldier needs to ask someone else to give me the permission to shoot. That person then needs to ask someone else to give me the permission to shoot. And that person needs to ask someone else in order to give me the permission to shoot. And if that question or that seeking permission goes on forever, literally forever, endlessly, without no end, just keeps on going back ad infinitum, would I ever get the chance to shoot? Obviously not, because I'm still waiting. And it's never going to come because it's infinitely going back. So likewise, if we were to use or apply the same reasoning when it comes to temporal causes, temporal phenomena, then the result is no creation. Nothing ever exists. You just have an abstract series of non-existence.
I'll give you I'll just chuck in a random thought, because what people say, some people have tried to address this, and they said that because your a priori or your axiom is essentially wanting to prove that God exists, you are going to build logical kind of reasonings behind it. So you get what I mean?
Yeah, but I think that's unfair. I think that's really unfair, because what people do essentially is that we start with epistemology. So our Muslim scholars, although you might think they already had a background of God, which may be true, but if we had a blank slate, we start on neutral grounds. We would first start with epistemology, and in the theory of knowledge, which is epistemology, we'll start up with our self-evident truth, our axioms, and from that we'll arrive at a conclusion. And I think that's a fair representation.
You need axioms for everything in life.
Yeah.
And even you have scientists and whoever, physicists and stuff, they'll act like, logic, science is all objective and all that, but it all starts with something. So even, logic, mathematics, you need stuff to start with, or else how are you going to begin?
But I don't understand at what point the kind of Muslim arguments become contingent upon a faith or like a jump, like the Kalam cosmological argument particularly. At what point is one of those kind of self-evident, not self-evident, but only seeable to Muslims, or understandable to Muslims?
It's not. It's actually a universal argument that I think any human can understand it. It's like one of those universal arguments that can be rationally discerned. As long as you have a rational intellect, then I think you can rationally discern it to be acceptable and true.
Because all the other possibilities are rationally impossible.
Yeah.
To us. And so I guess, absolutely. Are there any other kind of, besides the Kalam cosmological argument, any kind of... So
there's the other argument, which is Dalilul Imkan, which basically means the argument from possibility, the argument from contingency. So this one say that the universe itself is contingent, and in other words, it didn't have to exist. So the existence of the universe wasn't by necessity, it didn't have to exist. And given that it didn't have to exist, someone must have made it exist. Therefore, it's contingent upon something else, usually a necessary being, in order to give rise to the contingency of the universe.
And who came? Because from memory, I know Ibn Sina is a bit controversial, but apparently he came up with that argument. But do you know who came up with that? I know Ibn Sina had a theory where like he came up. I don't know. It was like he came up with what he made famous about the like what you just said. Like the it didn't have to exist, but it inclined to having like existed.
Yeah.
So that's like you can use that as a proof.
I wouldn't say he was the first person that came up with the argument, although his formulation of that argument is quite famous. It's quite elaborate as well. It has like more than 16 individual premises in order to prove the argument. But he wasn't the first. There were people before him. So he literally borrowed certain premises, evidence, tools from from the Greek philosophers. Because the Greek philosophers, they also believed in the understanding of contingency.
Plato definitely believed in one God. Even,
Yeah, he believed in one God, but his notion or his conception of God was bizarre.
Do you know
it wasn't it?
It's going to digress a bit, but you know, Ibn Sina came up with that theory of, you know, I think, was it if you're like, how do you know you exist kind of thing? So like, what is really you? Like, you're up in space. He had the theory, I forgot. I'm skipping my mind.
I'm not too familiar with
it's
that.
like, there's the theory of, you know, are you the soul or are you just a body or...
Okay, yeah.
Like,
so
they'll point at you. Is that you really you? Like, sorry, I'm getting a bit.
Well, it depends. Like, if we're gonna speak about the multiverse, then there could be another parallel universe, right?
Yeah.
No,
so it's not the real you.
Yeah, it's a possible you, not the actual you.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just digressing.
And there's one theory that I actually came across. I think philosophers in the past kind of talked about it. It was the idea that, for example, here on Earth, you know, we have a glass of water, yeah, and we fill it up. We fill up the glass with water, yeah. But if you actually think about it, there's a million other things that we could have done with that glass. But I chose to put water in that glass. Right? I could have put orange juice. I could have smashed the glass. I could have done whatever, right? But that one thing happened. So out of that infinite kind of possibilities, I chose that instance, right? So taking that into account, now you think about the world around you and, you know, the way, I don't know, the clouds move and how nature runs its course, that there is actually a higher being that actually allows for that to happen in that certain way, if that makes sense. So things that are beyond our control, there's a million possibilities, but it's taking one action. So that means that taking the, you know, filling up the glass with water example, that there's a higher being filling up the glass, and, you know, the glass
one
is
possibility was selected. Yeah.
If
one course of action. Yeah, that actually hinges upon the argument from contingency. That everything is contingent, as in it doesn't have to be that particular way. So why is it that way? It requires a determinant, a preponderator to choose that course of action or that particular action to be made and selected.
And it's really powerful as well.
Yeah, it's a proof of the will of the being as well.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
The fact that we came out this way indicates will, like that we had to select this particular choice. Yeah. There's also another really interesting one. I don't know if you've ever heard of Mullah Sadra.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, he had a logical proof for God that was basically like, there is a being, and that this being is a perfection beyond all perfection, like within this world, and that God is this perfection in existence, but existence is a singular, a simple reality separate from that. But that singular reality is graded and must have different layers of perfection. So imperfection being the bottom, so like shaitan, for example, and then perfection being the highest of God. And it's like that must have a limit point between the greatest perfection and the least greatest perfection. Therefore, it's like God must exist. If the idea of being perfect or imperfect exists, then God must exist. And the same is for good as well.
Yeah, that's actually similar. It's not the same, but it's similar to the ontological argument for God. That God, our definition of God is that He is the greatest conceivable being, or the supremely perfect being, or the maximally perfect being. As you know, certain philosophers use different terminologies, and that's our definition of God. So, in order for the greatest conceivable being to exist, it must possess existence. So they'll say, then therefore God exists because He is the greatest conceivable being. And if it didn't possess existence, then He wouldn't be the greatest conceivable being.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the same kind of thing, just phrased differently. That's really interesting. See, that's all pretty strong and not kind of predicated on some kind of Islamic faith at all.
It's not. It's actually a priori. The scholars argue that's a priori argument for the existence of God.
You know how atheists, this is like so common, they come up to you, touched on it before, that, you know, there's no evidence for God. I want to kind of break it down, because to me it doesn't make any sense. Because, like, let's just take my life, for example. You know, growing up, you know, I wasn't particularly practicing. Eventually, alhamdulillah, became practicing. But even before, when I wasn't practicing, I had a bit of, you know, Islamic, I had touch with the Islamic faith. I'd go to Jummah khutbahs and get that, you know, iman high, that sort of stuff growing up. But even before then, you know, I was like a little kid. Even my parents weren't like forcibly, you know, they didn't force Islam on me, sort of thing. So, like, my evidence is literally around me. I knew I had a strong faith in God already, like from such a young age. Just looking around, I'll be like, you know, how did the skies get up? There has to be a creator. Like, to me, it was like so simple, so straightforward. Like, I reflect on it sometimes to this day. I'm like, you know, because being Muslim now, and, you know, running podcasts or whatever, watching stuff, reading stuff, you're so you're exposed to all these philosophical arguments and all this stuff, and atheists and whatnot. You start to forget, like, the real, you know, humanity, like basic stuff. So it's like, exactly. And I had that from a very young age. So to me, when an atheist kind of comes up to me and asks, you know, there's no evidence for God, I don't know what he means. So what would you say? Like, what do they actually mean by saying there's no evidence? Are they saying that, oh, God didn't come down, I can't see God, so there's no evidence? Or like, because for us, even evidence can come to revelation and then Quran, like, you can trickle it down to many different ways, but I don't know what the atheists mean.
So they have one argument called divine hiddenness, which is exactly like the divine, God is hidden. I can't see God, therefore God doesn't exist. So it's one of those lame
on the fact that because they said there's no evidence, they're saying the only evidence is that if God shows him.
But they can't see pathogens either, that make you sick. So it's like, what happens if there's a robot in the sky that controls when you get sick and don't get sick? Like,
but they'll say like
that's not an illogical thing, is it?
They'll say microscope.
But they've never seen the microscope. They're relying on people who've testified that they've seen it through a microscope. You know what I mean?
See, so this is where atheists, right? They're so into the worldview of science, where it hinges everything they think is. Like, they have this notion that it's all scientific, but what you just mentioned is all testimony, but it's all actually, like, it's a different thing that they're basing their faith on.
Yes, they usually come from a scientific point of view. So they want scientific, material, physical, tangible evidence. And for them, that's what counts as evidence, as a proper evidence, because, you know, they have that scientific mentality. Everything has to be scientifically tested, rigorously, you know, scientifically tested. If it's not, then it's no evidence.
They didn't do the experiments themselves.
No, they don't. It's testimony.
They're relying on the testimony of people who did. And it's
testimony.
Like, that's what we do. And you're calling us stupid.
Yeah.
Literally calling us.
Yeah, because, you know, you haven't gone to Madagascar. You don't know it exists. It's all testimony. So I guess atheists are sort of lost even in their own worldview, because they don't know what they're actually thinking or basing their beliefs on. It's all testimony. It's not
the idea that there's no evidence for God, like, that statement is just wrong, because you can say I'm not convinced by the evidence, or I see no proof. Like, even though I disagree with that statement, it's still more sensible than there exists no evidence.
In fact, to even make that claim that there is no evidence, you would have to have knowledge of every single thing. Like, knowledge of every place, knowledge of every single material, in order to come to the conclusion there is no absolute evidence for God.
You know, the black swan argument kind of thing, it goes flat on themselves kind of thing. So like, there's so much to kind of unpack when it comes to atheists, because you can't achieve everything through that scientific lens per se. So,
and even like whenever the scientists or physicists, when they postulate some type of model for a substitute or replacement for God, such as the multiverse, you know, they'll use this type of substitute for the existence of God, but there's a lot of lack in explanation, a lot of lack in explanatory success when it comes to that. So, for example, if you have a conception of God, you can explain certain things such as revelation. You can explain prophets. You can explain, you know, objective morality. You can explain consciousness, life, etc. If you don't have God and if you have the multiverse, then, like, as in, how do you explain on your view that there's life? How do you explain that there's consciousness? How do you explain objective morality? You know, all of these things, whether it's the multiverse, whether it's the quantum model fluctuation, or any other string theory, M theory, it can't explain all of these basic, you know, human existential properties that we have. So how do you explain it? And on an atheistic view, you can't.
So from conversations, I feel that there's some people who are genuinely curious. So like the agnostics, and then you have people who literally come up to you. They want to talk to you, but they're literally like, Islam is just like other religions, you know, or they kind of have this fixed mindset. How do you approach them as opposed to approaching kind of more like fluid people who are happy to kind of seek truth? Is there a difference in how you approach?
As in, I'll try my best to show the uniqueness of Islam by saying I believe that Islam is a religion that's compelling, coherent evidences for its basic theological claims, unlike any other religion. So then, I'm just trying to capture their attention that Islam is unique from this perspective. And then I'll go on. Obviously, it starts with God. Everything does start with God, because usually these type of people are agnostic about God. So there's no point speaking about the Quran or prophecy of Muhammad or prophecies, everything else, if you don't establish the existence of God. So after establishing the existence of God, then I speak about the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he is a prophet of God. And then there's certain evidence for that. And once you speak about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it actually captures their attention.
And like people will be like, yeah, I can accept God exists, but I'm not too sure about the prophecy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So would you go hard into kind of bringing out examples in the seerah, maybe miracles that he did?
So that's a good question. So when it comes to proving the prophethood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's many different evidences, but you could say he received the Quran, and the Quran itself is a miracle. So if he received the Quran and the Quran is a miracle, then the Quran is from Allah. So let's look inside the Quran what it says. And in the Quran it says Muhammad Rasulullah, Muhammad is the messenger of God. So that just confirms that Muhammad is the prophet of God. But that also at the same time proves that the Quran is from Allah. So you're proving both. You're proving that the Quran is from God, and at the same time you're proving Prophet Muhammad is the prophet of God. Another way, just sticking to the Prophet Muhammad himself, is by looking at the seerah, his miracles. Some of the scholars say that he performed over 1,000 miracles.
I'm actually at the moment reading his book. Sorry, not Rasulullah's book. Ibn Kathir's book is like Miracles of the Prophet, and someone translated it into English, and it's like pages and pages, just a lot of things. What I realize we don't emphasize on when we're young, because we talk about Quran being from God and all these evidences, but we forget actually like there's so many stuff that Rasulullah did that, like, what I actually realize is that he did the same miracles sometimes, but he did it a lot of times. Like, for example, like food, small plate of food feeding like 100 people. He did it like a lot of times.
He did,
I was reading the book. It's like 4 or 5 pages. It's the same miracle, but it's different people. What's going on? But subhanAllah, like, I guess we gloss over it.
That's
sometimes.
true. Also, another instances where the water would flow from the blessed hands of Rasulullah between the fingers. Water would just flow down. Another instance, milk would flow down from the hands of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So all of these miracles, in fact, as I said, some scholars said that there was over 1,000 miracles that the Prophet ﷺ performed and they were witnessed by the people. So that's obviously testimony that he's a prophet of Allah, because he performed miracles. Above that, he had such an impeccable akhlaq. His akhlaq was, to a very high level, high standard, high moral of character he was.
Yeah, and just look what he sallallahu alaihi wasallam achieved. Personally, I mean, I take it from more like
historical background.
What he did. He did what Genghis Khan, Caesar, all of them great people of history put together. He was a lawmaker, a legislator, a military genius tactician, a military steward, like administrator. He dealt with the spiritual states of every single individual person within his domain, within Medina.
And to cap it off, he lived in like a stick house and like with no door, actually, like, he lived, like, why would a man like take over the world pretty much? But
he didn't take it for himself.
And he said himself, like, this is not Jannah, we're
he had little care, if no care at all for this world. But subhanallah, his focus was actually, and it relates to Dawah, his focus was actually on bringing the people to Islam. How can they be saved from the fire of hell? And he'll be grieved, Rasulullah, he'll be grieved and he'll be saddened, by the people rejecting, not accepting Islam. So he has this, great noble mission, Sunnah of Rasulullah. This is why we should give Dawah.
I think, like, we're about to be kicked out because we're recording a UCID in the media rooms. But just to wrap it up, Jazakallah khair, Mustafa, coming on Boys in the Cave. I think it was really insightful episode. It's really chilled, laid back. But I think we talked about a lot of arguments.
Alhamdulillah, I think everyone here should take away, even like get a pen and paper out and take away some of those arguments. And next time you're with like
destroying atheists.
Yeah.
The kuffar intellectually.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah, I think there was a lot of good information mentioned, like in one recording. So I think people can, like you said, just write down the main points.
And you could honestly talk about each one of those, like some of those like points and those proofs. You could talk about them alone for like half
exactly,
an hour.
yeah.
Even like with the multiverse, like you hear like atheists just like bringing it up like no tomorrow, but they don't even know what it is, and it's just
they have no clue.
Like theory, like it's nothing real, like evidence. If I'm correct.
Yeah, there's actually not a shred of evidence for the multiverse theory. No,
I'd say there's more evidence for.
But I don't know why they bring it up. They want evidence for God.
They bring up that's the irony, right? They expect like what's the evidence for God, but they have no evidence whatsoever for the multiverse. But what they do point out though is that it's mathematically consistent. We can build mathematical models that are compatible with the multiverse. So
that goes back to testimony, because they didn't do the mathematics themselves, so it's like a blind faith essentially. Like it's more like we mentioned this before we started the episode. It's all comes like they try to act like whatever they believe in, like whatever they think they're using, like logic reasons, all objective and this and that, but at the end of the day they are making themselves into a religion by doing that, because even Islamically, logic, rationality, these are tools. Science is a tool. The way we think about the world, it's all tools. It's not the end or be all. It's not objective. It can't be objective. Like you can we had the episode with Dr. Mohammed Gilan. People want to check that out. We talked about more in depth than what we did today about rationality just being a tool, because even the Meccans justified what they did through rationality. Like it doesn't mean it's true. Like there's so many things you can justify that's completely wrong, but it's like rational.
True. Yeah. That's a good point. The rationality, it's a tool to an end. Exactly. And the end is to actually have knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, exactly. But it's not logic itself, which is the destination or the objective.
Like logic should bring you to the fact that the Quran is word from God, like all these things. And it's like, for example, the example that I've heard is that you see someone, that got into an accident, they're crippled, yeah? Your logic dictates you got to take him to the hospital, right? Like the logic doesn't dictate that you, as a nobody, take him to the hospital and be like to the hospital, hey, I know, this seems better than what you guys are doing, this and that. You don't dictate. Logic doesn't dictate that. Logic just dictates you take him. So it's like for us, logic should dictate to us that yes, Quran is word of God and there's prophets that came down, with the message and whatnot. But the message itself, we can't like logically kind of rationalize that, because we'll just be corrupting it, essentially. You know what I mean?
Pretty much, yeah. So it's just a means to the conclusion.
Exactly. Subhanallah. So I'll wrap it up there. But for our listeners, thank you for giving us your attention. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email us at info@boysinthecave.com or find us on Facebook. And you can finally follow our journey through Instagram. Please leave a 5-star rating on iTunes, as that greatly helps us. As I mentioned earlier, support on our Patreon. We've got a lot of options, tires that are, if you can donate as much as you can, it's up to you. And even with, you can realize the quality of the audio, it's top notch right now. I know you guys must be feeling, feeling good to the ears. So, just donate literally. Like these are the sort of improvements we can make with your support, inshallah. And one thing I do want to mention is that with our YouTube page, I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned before or not, but what happened with the Thai boys that got trapped in the cave, alhamdulillah, they got out, but because of all their views on YouTube and stuff, our Boys in the Cave YouTube account got pushed to like 3rd page. If you search Boys in the Cave on YouTube, so search, if you want to find us on YouTube, search Boys in the Cave podcast, and then you'll find us, inshallah. So from our special guest Mustafa, co-host Rafael, and myself, we wish you all the best. This is Tanzim signing you off. Assalamu alaikum.
Alright, let's get out of here, man. The woman's scary.
Get out of here, man.